Today we're turning 2-layer cakes and a bunch of scrap fabric into a wonky tree quilt. And guess what? There's no pattern needed. Welcome to Jenna Tries, and today we're trying to make a quilt without a pattern. And I'm gonna take the perfectionist out of me, and it's okay if things aren't perfect. This is supposed to be a little bit wonky, and we're making some wonky Christmas tree blocks. Well, not Christmas tree, but just tree blocks, but they look like Christmas trees, right? And to make a full quilt out of this, I'm gonna need 2-layer cakes of whatever kind you want that works together, and then a bunch of scrap pieces. I want my scrap pieces to be brown, but you can choose literally whatever you want. And before we start, the Grace products I'll be using today are the 3x18 square ruler, the 45mm comfort cutter, the 36" by 24" cutting mat, the Little Rebel, and some light wool finesse thread. First, we gotta cut our fat quarters into different sizes to make our trees. And I want you to look at these 2 blocks. So we got this guy where the trunk is a little bit longer and the tree part is a little bit smaller. And then you have this guy where the trunk is a little bit shorter and the tree part is a little bit wider. And so what's really cool about a quilt like this is having variation in your block sizes. The first thing we have to do is cut our 2-layer cakes. And I want you to first find 2 pieces of fabric that would work well together, and I like to do high contrasting fabric. So for example, we have a green, which is a little bit lighter, and then under it I have this woven that is brown and black that is a little bit darker. And then these 2, because they contrast more, the tree is gonna stand out just a little bit. I'll lay them on top of each other. And the first cut we're gonna make is a horizontal cut. And you can decide what that cut is gonna be. For every block, it can be different. For this one, let's say I want 2.5 inches. I'll cut that part down, and then I'm just gonna cut this bottom piece in half randomly. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just wanna cut it down the middle somewhere. Now we're gonna cut the tree part, and I'm gonna cut at a diagonal angle, and you can change the size of your tree depending on the angle. So for a wider tree, I'm gonna move it more this way, and I wanna make sure that on the end, there's at least a 1/2 inch left, just to account for seam allowance. I'll cut it one way, I'll move this guy back, and now I'm gonna make another cut to make my tree. And again, I'm just doing it very random. So I want my tree to be short and fat for this one, short and wide. So I'm going to maybe cut it right there. Now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. And out of these pieces, we're gonna make 2 blocks. So I can take my green tree piece. So I'm gonna separate all of my pieces, and I'm gonna make one fabric the background for one block, and the other fabric the background for the other block. We're almost done. We just need some tree trunks. So I'm just gonna measure out what I want the trunk to be. And for me, I like to cut my scraps into a variety of lengths. I'll do 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3" strips of fabric, and then from that fabric, I just cut down what I need. For this top block, I think I want the lighter brown to be the trunk, and the trunk, it doesn't have to be the perfect width of whatever you cut. That is okay. We're gonna trim this down later and it will all work out in the end. And then I think for this bottom one, I want it to be this darker brown. Perfect. And now we're gonna sew all of these together, but there are some tips and tricks that will make your fabric line up just a little bit easier as you're sewing. First, we're gonna start by sewing our bottom pieces together, and you would sew those together like normal. When sewing these guys together, I just like to make sure the top of all of the fabrics are lining up, and it's okay if the bottom doesn't line up. I can trim that off later. So I'll sew these guys together and be right back. And then when you go to press your trunk block, you can press it whatever way you want, but I tend to press in to that trunk piece. Now we've got to sew together our tree top. I'm first going to sew the tree top to this piece and then sew them to this piece. But in order to get our seams straight, our fabric straight on the bottom, there is a trick to it. So if I were to fold this over and line up those edges absolutely perfectly, those points, if I were to sew that, you can see that my line would stop right here and right here. And I'd have a bunch of extra fabric. That is more work that I have to do trimming off both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this point down to overlap the bottom of this piece by 1/4 of an inch. It's okay up here if there's no overlapping of fabric. We're going to trim off one edge, and it's that edge later. But if we line this up by 1/4 of an inch, perfect. I can now sew using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance those two pieces together. Then when I press this, I like to press towards that tree part so then the seam is under the tree. Now I want you to look at our block. Right here where we overlapped that edge by 1/4 of an inch, both the green fabric and the brown black fabric right here, both of them line up perfectly along that edge. I can put my ruler right up to there and it's perfect. You just have that little dog ear hanging out. But if you look at this side, there's a lot of green fabric just hanging out. So we are going to just cut that straight. So I'm gonna line up my ruler with the edge of that tree and cut that excess fabric off. Now we have a straight line to sew these two blocks together with. And again, I'm gonna fold this green piece over the top, and I wanna make sure that there is 1/4 of an inch of the bottom block of the tree piece just hanging out down at the bottom. And then I can sew these two together using that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Then to press it, I just like to press towards the background fabric this time, but truly you can press whatever which way you want. And because we overlapped these two pieces using 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, if you look at the bottom edges of these three pieces of fabric, they all line up absolutely perfectly, so there's no trimming needed. And the last thing we're gonna need to do is sew our trunk onto our tree, and I'm just gonna kind of center this. And for me, I like to center it with the point, but you can center it or even put the trunk wherever you want. Again, this is a wonky tree quilt. Nothing needs to be perfect. So I'm gonna put it like right here-ish. I'll fold it over and then sew these together using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I want you to notice that I didn't trim off the excess fabric just yet. I'm gonna have to trim this block after we press it. And if I had trimmed all this fabric beforehand, that's just extra work that's gonna take more time that I can just do later. And when I finish pressing this block, I like to press towards the tree part. What you do with one half of the block, you do the other, and now you have two blocks that are the exact same, not exact same, but they're the same but opposite, if that makes sense. You see it? I see it. But now I gotta trim it. And because this is a wonky block, we don't have to trim it exactly perfectly. So I like to line up my two blocks on top of each other. Now I'm gonna trim these blocks down to be the exact size I want them to be. And I want them to be 9 inches by 8.5 inches. But if you don't have a whole lot of excess fabric where you don't have that 9 inches or even 8.5 inches, you can cut it down a little smaller. You just want to make sure that every block you cut is the exact same size so then you can piece them together in a grid. And do you see now why I didn't trim off the excess of all of my pieces earlier? That would have just been a waste of time. And now we got our two perfect tree blocks. What's really fun with making a quilt like this with a bunch of different tree blocks is the varying sizes of things. So for example, if I wanted to, I could have a really long tree trunk. Maybe I want my tree trunk really tall. So here's my really, really tall tree trunk. And let's say I want the tree part of it to be a little bit smaller. Just a little bit smaller. And maybe I want my trunk to be tall and super, super skinny. So I can put my skinny piece right there. And there is a different variation of your tree trunk. Or maybe I want my trunk to be super, super tall and wide. You could do that too. Another variation that is super fun is doing just an average size trunk. And then for your tree, making it tall and skinny. But you can really play around with the design in any way you want. And now we have tall and skinny, and then maybe I want a medium-sized trunk. And that would be super cute too. What I've noticed with the Wonky tree block is the more variation of sizes of trees and trunks and all the things you have, the better your quilt will look in the end. This is a Christmas tree quilt that I made with my cousins. We did a block swap where each of us made 40, I think we each made 42 blocks and then traded them. And for this project, I decided to make 80-ish blocks. I think I made 84 because it's 2-layer cakes. And it made the perfect size quilt. Do you see the variation in the trees? It's just so cute. And then with this quilt, I put Minky on the back that I had lying around, so it's all scraps. And I used a snowflake pattern that's on Grace Company's design store that looks just so cute and fun and festive. Most people, when they think Wonky tree quilt, they really think Christmas, but I wanted to show you an example of something that's not Christmas so you can kind of get your creative lights glowing. For this quilt, there is no Christmas, no holiday involved. It is literally just like color explosion. But to make a little bit more sense with the color explosion, I decided to put my darker values in the corners. So you can see at this corner, it was the darker values and more of the warmer colors. So your red, orange, yellow. And then down here at the bottom, I started with my darker values that are cooler. So my blues, purples, and greens. And then as you go towards the middle, if you can see, we're going towards the middle, the backgrounds are our lighter values. And when playing with values and color like this, what you're doing is you're telling a person's eye where to look. So when you look at this quilt, you see that the lightest block is kind of in the middle. This block, where is it? Is it this one? On camera it looks lightest. I know it's not the lightest, but you have a light block in the middle, and then your eyes are drawn to the corners where you have your darker values in those bolder colors. And so what this is doing is it's making a quilt where all the fabric is really bright and bold and funky, and it's making it easier to look at it without being overwhelmed. It's giving your eye a place to rest. The lighter values in the middle, giving your eye a place to rest. And I'm not sure how I'm going to quilt this, so if you have ideas on how to quilt this, make sure to put them in the comments. I also want you to notice the different sizes of trunks and the lengths of them and the trees, and just see how, even though they're all a little bit different, it works together because all of them are consistently inconsistent. If you want to turn this tree block into a quilt, just like this one, you're going to need 2-layer cakes, and then after you cut and sew them all together, you're going to have 84 total blocks. You're going to only need 81. I decided to do a 9x9 grid. You can also do 8x10, whatever fits your fancy. And even though you don't need a pattern for this block, I decided to write one for you anyway, and it's for free in the link below, just because I know some quilters like to read their directions rather than watch them. And so you have that there. Remember, it is for free in the link below. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. If this is a block that you'd like to make, or if you're interested in more fun quilting content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Jenna Tries.